Chapter 15 of The Dragon and the Raven by G.A. Henty. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Mike Harris. The Dragon and the Raven by G.A. Henty. Chapter 15. Friends in Trouble. Although for a time the Northmen abstained from grand assaults, continued skirmishes took place. Sometimes parties landed beneath the walls and strove to carry off the cattle, which the besieged turned out to gather a little fresh food there. Sometimes the citizens, led by Eudes or Ebble, would take a boat and cross and endeavour to cut off small parties of the enemy. They had now sufficient boats at their disposal for expeditions of this kind, for in their last defeat the Danes had in their haste left several boats behind them. Of one of the largest of these Esmond took possession, and going out in her at night, several times succeeded in capturing Danish vessels, sometimes while they were rowing along the river unsuspicious that any foes were near, sometimes by boarding them as they lay alongside the bank. As the vessels so captured were too large to be dragged ashore, and could have been easily recaptured by the Danes, they were, after being emptied of their contents, always burned. The plague continued its ravages, and the city became straitened for provisions. Count Eudes therefore determined to go to King Charles to urge him to hurry to the succour of the town. Almost all the chiefs of the defence had fallen victims to the pest or had been killed in battle with the Danes, and the count at his departure committed the defence of the city to the Abbé Ebble and to Edmund. He then crossed the stream at night and made his way successfully through the Danes. The Abbé and Edmund vied with each other in keeping up the spirits of the garrison with successful little forays with the Danes, frequently crossing the river to the one bank or the other, sometimes with parties of only 5 or 6 men, and falling upon similar bodies of the enemy. Several times they pounced upon small herds of the enemy's cattle, and driving them into the river, directed them in their boats across the stream. In the commencement of July, Eudes appeared on the slopes of Montmartre with 3 battalions of soldiers. The enemy, who were for the most part on the other side of the Seine, crossed the river. A desperate battle ensued. A portion of the garrison crossed in boats to the assistance of their friends, Edmund leading over his band of Saxons. With these he fell upon the rear of the Danes engaged in fighting with the force under the count, and the Northmen, attacked on both sides, gave way and took to flight. They were hotly pursued by the Franks. The reinforcements entered Paris triumphantly by the bridge, which had long since been repaired. But the siege was not yet over. When the news of the victory of Eudes spread, the Danes again drew together from all parts, and, crossing the river, attacked the city on every side. The onslaught was more furious than any which had preceded it. The Danes had provided themselves with large numbers of mangonels and catapults. Every man capable of bearing arms was upon the walls, but so furious was the attack, so vast the number of assailants, so prodigious were the clouds of missiles which they rained upon the walls, that the besieged almost lost heart. The relics of St. Genevieve were taken round the walls. In several places the Danes had formed breaches in the walls, and although the besieged still struggled, hope had well nigh left them, and abject terror reigned in the city. Women ran about the streets screaming and crying that the end was at hand. The church bells tolled dismally, and the shouts of the exultant Danes rose higher and higher. Again a general cry rose to Saint-Germain to come to the aid of the town. Just at this moment Edmund and Egbert, who had till now held the Saxons in reserve, feeling that a desperate effort must be made, formed up their band, and advancing to the principal breach, passed through the ranks of the disheartened Franks, and with levelled pikes charged headlong down into the crowd of Danes. The latter, already exhausted by their efforts, were at once borne back before the serried pikes of their fresh assailants. In vain their chiefs at that point tried to rally them. Nothing could withstand the impetus of the Saxon attack. Astonished at seeing the tide of battle swept away from the breach, the French believed that Saint-Germain had wrought a miracle in their favour, and, taking heart, poured out into the rear of the Saxons. The news of the miracle spread rapidly. Through the breaches and from every gate they poured out suddenly upon the Danes, who, struck with consternation at this sudden onslaught by a foe whom they had already regarded as beaten, hesitated and soon took to flight. Vast numbers were cut down before they could reach their vessels. A great portion fled toward the bridge and endeavoured to cross there, but their numbers impeded them, and the Saxons and Franks, falling upon their rear, effected a terrible slaughter. 2 days after the battle a force of 600 Franks arrived from the Emperor Charles. The Danes sought to oppose their entrance to the city, but were defeated with a loss of 3,000 men. The siege was now virtually over, and in a short time the emperor himself with a great army arrived. It was now November, and after some negotiations the Danes agreed upon the receipt of 700 pounds of silver to retire to Burgundy, and to leave the country at the beginning of March. Having wasted Burgundy, however, they again returned to Paris. Consternation seized the capital when the fleet of the Northmen was seen approaching. A treaty, however, was made, for the wind had fallen just when the Danish fleet, which had but lately arrived and was descending the river, was abreast of Paris. As soon as the wind became favourable, the Northmen broke the truce, slew a number of Franks who had mingled among them, and passed up the Marne. In the meantime Emperor Charles had died, and Count Eudes had been chosen his successor. When the Danes again advanced against Paris, he speedily sent reinforcements. The town had already repulsed an attack. Eudes himself, on St. John's Day, was advancing with 1,000 men-at-arms, when he was attacked by 10,000 mounted Danes and 9,000 footmen. The combat was desperate, but the Franks were victorious. Eudes, however, had other difficulties. Burgundy and Aquitaine revolted, and in order to secure peace to the kingdom, he made a treaty with the Danes, giving over to them the province of Normandy. Edmund and Egbert had no part in the second siege of Paris. As soon as the place was relieved by the Emperor Charles, they prepared to depart. Taking boats, they ascended the river, and to their joy found the Dragon safe in the hiding place where she had been lying for nearly a year. She was brought out into the stream and floated down to Paris, where by the order of Count Eudes she was thoroughly repaired and redecorated. The Franks, convinced that next only to the assistance of Saint Germain they owed the safety of their city to the valour of the Saxons, loaded them with presents, and these, with the gifts which they had previously received after the destruction of the three towers, and the sums for which the booty captured from the Danes had been sold, made up a great treasure. Upon the day before they had arranged to sail, a Danish boat was seen rowing down the stream. It approached the Dragon, and the helmsman asked, "Is this the ship the Dragon, and has it for a captain Edmund the Saxon?" "I am Edmund," he replied, "and this is the Dragon. What would you with me?" "I am sent by the Jarl Siegbert, who lies wounded near, to beg that you will come to him immediately, as he is in sore strait and needs your assistance." "I will come at once," Edmund said. "Put one of your men on board to show me where he is, for I shall be there before you." Edmund's horn sounded the signal, and messengers were sent to the town to order the crew at once to repair on board the Dragon. Edmund landed and took leave of the Frankish leaders. The provisions and stores were hastily carried on board, and then, amidst the enthusiastic cheers of the inhabitants who thronged the walls and the shore, the oars were got out, and the Dragon proceeded at the top of her speed up the river. On the way Edmund questioned the Dane, and found that Siegbert had been wounded in the last assault upon Paris. He had not been present at the first part of the siege, having but recently arrived from Norway. His daughter Freda had accompanied him. Yes, she was still unmarried, although many valiant Northmen had sought her hand, chief among them the brave leader Sweyn of the Left Hand. But there had been a fray on the previous night in Siegbert's camp, and it was said, but for that he could not vouch, that Freda had been carried off. The news filled Edmund with anxiety. Ever since the day he left her on her father's galley his thoughts had turned often to the Danish maiden, and the resolution to carry out his promise and some day seek her again had never for a moment wavered. He had seen many fair young Saxons, and could have chosen a bride where he would among these, for few Saxon girls would have turned a deaf ear to the wooing of one who was at once of high rank, a prime favourite of the king, and regarded by his countrymen as one of the bravest of the Saxon champions. But the dark-haired Freda, who united the fearlessness and independence of a woman with the frankness and gaiety of a child, had won his heart. It was true she was a Dane and a pagan, but her father was his friend, and would, he felt sure, offer no objections on the ground of the enmity of the races. Since Guthorn and his people had embraced Christianity, the enmity between the races, in England at least, was rapidly declining. As to her religion, Edmund doubted not that she would, under his guidance and teaching, soon cast away the blood-stained gods of the Northmen and accept Christianity. In the 5 years of strife and warfare which had elapsed since he saw her, Edmund had often pictured their next meeting. He had not doubted that she would remain true to him. Few as were the words which had been spoken, he knew that when she said, "I will wait for you even till I die," she had meant it, and that she was not one to change. He had even been proposing on his return to England to ask King Alfred to arrange through Guthorn for a safe pass for him to go to Norway. To hear, then, that she had been carried off from her father's side was a terrible blow.